Hello everybody, welcome to the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown. My name is Pojo. We're not recording this live, actually. I did a spoiler breakdown on stream. It was a bit of a dog's breakfast. There was a lot of stuff coming in, like spoilers that got spoiled, like while we were talking about them. And looking back at it, I have a couple more things that I want to say about each of the cards. So we're going to actually go over basically everything again for the YouTube folks, and we're going to just basically talk about each of the cards in turn. So we have a couple of new cards today. Mainly there is a new power, there's an uncommon that we're going to talk about in detail, and there's a cool legendary that might be like a marquee card for the set. There's also one token type card that we're going to be talking about a little bit called Claw of Curiox. And overall it's looking pretty exciting. There's some things that I have notes on, and yeah, I'm excited to get into it. The first thing we're going to talk about is Clan Standard, and we don't know everything about Clan Standard yet because Clan Standard has a transmute ability that turns it into a 5-cost card called Clan Tactic. And we can't guarantee, of course, that it's a 5-cost card, but considering how transmute works, it should be a 5-cost card. Much like Monuments, this card allows you to play up to 5 power in your setup, and basically if you have a limit of 5 power, if your top end is 5 power, that makes cards like Clan Standard a lot better. And I think the thing that's really neat about this is that it is something that you can play with Monuments, like Cobalt Monuments, to actually stay at 5 power and continue to play cards out and just have a really, really high density of useful cards in your deck. What Clan Tactic will do, I do not know. I'm going to guess that it's somewhat modular and involves making a choice of some kind, just because it is a tactic, but it could be a fast spell or some sort of interesting trick. If it transmutes without your opponent knowing about it, that would be really interesting, but I think that most of the time you do see the transmute effect when that happens, so we will see if that's going to be a thing. So regardless, we'll see more about Clan Standard and review more about Clan Standard when we know what the Clan Tactic is. At the moment, I think it's an interesting addition that might actually make Monuments stronger, just because the ability to play both Monuments and Tactics allows you to basically just have a higher density of a particular type of power. And how you construct your power base in Eternal is really, really interesting and can often be sort of dependent on what type of deck you want to play. Like if you want to seek for a lot of different types of powers, then oftentimes you will go for, like, if you're using Secret Pages and Find the Ways, then you'll go for the basic power setups. If you want to use crests to sort through your deck, then you'll have like a more control-oriented style. If you want to do a mid-range style, then you're probably going to be doing Clan Standards and Monuments and those kinds of things to keep things around 5 and have that like higher density, and that can be really cool as well. And if you want to do aggro, then you just go like straight power, banners, that kind of stuff. The overall shape of the Eternal power structure is getting really interesting, and this is a cool addition. We'll see if there are any other powers that are added in the new setup, but I'm excited to see what this is and what we're doing with it. Okay, let's talk about the Claw next. So Claw of Curiox is a 3/3 weapon. It is a token. It does not have a gem, so keep in mind that this card is created by something and is not a card that you can just play, because if it was a card you could just play, it would be pretty dang good. A 3/3 killer weapon is actually quite ridiculous. It allows you to basically just make any, a 3/3 killer unit is quite ridiculous. So yeah, I'm hoping that this card is actually a story-based card of some kind and not like a card that is created by a new Curiox. Because I'm not sure if I like the idea of Dragon's Claws being units. I really was hoping that this was a weapon. When I was looking at it, I thought it was a weapon since it's called the Claw of Curiox, but it appears to still be attached to Curiox. So this might be something that gets played off of a boss, or something that gets played like off of a Curiox card that allows you to basically just make a 3/3 killer. There's not too much to say about this at the moment since it is a token. It's really going to be dependent on where the token comes from. A 3/3 killer for 3 is pretty efficient and pretty good, and that would be a fairly solid card to be having. There was a 2/2 killer way back in like open beta of Eternal, and it was a pretty strong card that eventually had to be removed because it was a little bit degenerate, not so fun, and also because it was out of color. It was in shadow, and killer moved to the Elysian archetype. So yeah, but Claw of Curiox, definitely kind of cool, interesting little token, and yeah, we don't have too much to say about that one either. So those are the two cards we don't have much opinion on yet. The next two we have very strong opinions on, and the first of these is gonna be Won't Be Pretty. Okay. So, I don't like this card at all. We talked about it a little bit on stream, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in detail. Won't Be Pretty is a 3-cost that says choose 2 enemy units. The enemy player chooses one to be dealt 6 damage. They play a +1/+1 unit on the other. Flavor-wise, this is actually pretty cool. So, like, as you can see from the art, what's basically going on is you have 2 hostages, and you are giving one of them a gun. The other one is dying to the gun. It's, you know, like, it's definitely not pretty. It's not a fun situation. It's not a good thing to happen to your units, and you do have to, like, make a pretty desperate choice. Lore-wise, I guess it's pretty cool. It's a good moment. That's nice. That's the thing that I think is interesting about this card, and what kind of makes it a fun, like, design from a narrative standpoint, from, like, a top-down perspective. But yeah, like, as to what particular moment it's putting forth in the lore, I'm guessing it's just, like, sort of generic gunslinger stuff. So Won't Be Pretty is actually probably more a design that is designed to, like, influence the way that draft works. And so we're going to talk about that, because this is an uncommon removal spell in Fire. I talked a little bit about how I kind of hoped that Fire was going to get some sort of new gun down type effect at cheap costs recently. I was thinking that it would be really nice if they had some option to maybe deal with, like, larger units. I think Fire does actually need that type of card to kill Sandstorm Titans and be a little bit more prevalent in the meta if it wants to push through, like, all of those endurance units and all of those big things. Like, this gives Fire some new sort of play that could be really, really interesting. But as far as things go, it's probably not a ranked card just because it gives your opponent too good a choice, and there are a lot of things that can go wrong. The main thing is that, like, obviously your opponent can have a bunch of units with 6 health, which are fairly common. Predatory Carnosaur, Sandstorm Titan, Heart of the Vault, all the things that Fire decks traditionally have, like, lots of problems with tend to have 6 health or more. There's, of course, the very common Tavrod. There's Worldbearer Behemoth. There's things that can take 6 damage and be very, very happy with it. So, like, if your opponent has 2 units down and one of them has an Aegis and you play Won't Be Pretty, your opponent gets a +1/+1 weapon and they pop their Aegis, and that's not that great for you. If your opponent has, like, 2 Aegis units down, maybe that's kind of an advantage, but it's still not really worth 3 power to do. And if your opponent has, like, 2 units down of, like, middling strength and Won't Be Pretty buffs one of them, which can be very bad for you, and kills the other one. And there are a lot of things that could influence how bad that is for you, whether the unit has lifesteal or double damage or any sort of ability that, like, quick draw, that allows it to benefit from having that weapon, whether playing the weapon on it maybe benefits your opponent in some way, like if they're playing Oni Quartermaster or any number of other things. There's so many different situations where them getting a +1/+1 weapon on their unit could just be better than them losing the unit, and they'd be okay to make that sacrifice. It's just not going to be worth you spending your entire turn 3 on that kind of removal. So I don't think this card sees a lot of ranked play, even though it is a Sandstorm Titan killer, something that can actually be used to maybe remove those types of cards. If you play this on your opponent's Initiative Sands and Sandstorm Titan, then you're not going to be a happy camper when the Sandstorm Titan gets a +1/+1 weapon and is now out of Obliterate range forever. That's not a lot of fun. So yeah, I don't see this card being played in ranked just because the power level is a little bit limited. That being said, as an uncommon card, it's going to be very common as removal in draft, which means that you have to pick it a lot, which means that you're going to play it a lot, which means that you're going to have to give your opponent this choice a lot. And your opponent might have some fun with that, but I don't think that you will, and that bothers me. As far as design goes, I think that a card that you are consistently forced to pick because it is removal, that also is really not that good removal, and is also really uncomfortable and, like, not fun to play, like, that does not bode well for a good draft environment. I don't think this card is really very interesting. I don't think it creates interesting situations beyond, like, how, like, much of that choice you want to eat, and I would be very frustrated playing this card over and over again in a draft environment. So I am not in love with Won't Be Pretty. I really don't think it's a good draft card, and I think it's a bad ranked card. And I think that overall, the ability to give your opponents bad choices that's the last thing that we want to talk about, which is color identity. So Fire is the faction of creation and destruction, and there's a little bit of that there. There's some destruction and creation here. You're creating a weapon, you're blowing something up on your opponent's side. So you could say that it is the flip of the coin, that it is in some way a Fire card because of that. And I can sort of see that, but I think that this is a shadow card. And like if you're playing it, you are giving your opponent the choice between killing one of their units and getting a cool thing. And that's an ambition thing, that is an instinct type thing, that is a thing that you specifically would play on a shadow card that kills a unit. So choose 2 units, your opponent kills one of them, they get a weapon. Or they get a gun, even, which is something that Shadow does. Shadow has gunslingers. So, like, this seems like a Shadow card to me, and it seems like it should be a Shadow removal card. And I would actually be okay with Shadow having worse removal in draft, especially if it's like this kind of removal. I'd be okay with that. I think that would be an okay card for Shadow to have, and, like, overall, Shadow can take more advantage of that because Shadow likes to make people make bad choices. So, that's pretty interesting. Now, the reason why this is a fire card, I think, has to do with Magic the Gathering, which has cards like Book Burning, cards that in Fire force your opponent to do something or to make a choice where you get a lot of special stuff out of it. So I think Book Burning is something like mill a bunch of cards or deal a ton of damage to your opponent. And like basically the idea is to force them to make a bad choice. And that's a thing that is very unique to Magic's color identity. I don't think it belongs in Eternal. I don't think it has anything to do with the fire color identity, and I think that this card is just simply mislabeled. Like, I am really not sure why this is a mechanic that's coming in, and I don't think that it's something that you really want to see a lot of in Fire. I hope we don't see more of it in Fire, and I hope that we don't see really any more of these like types of bad choices in general. I was a fan of Dezo Cabal Chairman. I think he's a cool card, but Dezo requires a lot of setup, and Dezo requires you to be very, very committed to that type of setup, where basically you're sacrificing units, you're doing really flavorful things, and then the decision that your opponent has to make really, really sucks. But the decision sucks for your opponent because you are basically just making sure that he loses something. Won't be pretty sucks for you, and it also sucks for your opponent, which is not fun either. So like, I don't know who's having fun when this card is played, and this card is an uncommon, so it's going to be played a lot. I am very frustrated with this card. I hope that it changes. I hope that there is something else that can be put in its slot. Like, this would be probably on top of my list for worst designs that I've seen in Spoilers, and possibly worst designs that I've seen in Eternal. So I am very, very down on this card. Do not like it at all. And that's basically what I would have to say about that. So yeah, that's the downer note. The upper note is that we have another fun card that involves cool choices, and it is also really, really great, and it's a sort of a cool, our first marquee card of the set, Answer the Call. All right, Answer the Call. 6 cost, 2 green. Play a unit from the top 6 cards of your deck, then play all weapons from amongst those cards on it, and discard the rest. Now, this is really interesting stuff. Tutor effects are really cool. There's an interesting design thing with tutors that is also something that I think Magic is trying to do now. And this is a lesson that I think I'm perfectly happy to have transferred over to Eternal, which is this idea that tutor effects are really interesting when they look at the top couple of cards of your deck, or when they look at like a certain amount, like the top 10 or the top 6 or the top 8, something along those lines where you get a limited pool of choices, like the Discover mechanic from Hearthstone, where you just have a couple of different things that you can decide from, and as a result, every time you play the card, you're presented with a bunch of choices that you have decided based off your deck, but that you have like some amount of randomness to it as well. So you have to make a tactical decision on the fly when you play the card. And Answer the Call is doing that, because it is specifically asking you to play a unit from the top 6 cards of your deck. I wish that Rise to the Challenge did this. I would really, really prefer it if it did. I don't care about Celestial Omen as far as things go, because I think Celestial Omen is pretty cool, and like, you know, it's definitely costed to do exactly what it's supposed to be doing. But yeah, I kind of wish that Rise to the Challenge looked at the top 6 or the top 10 or something along those lines, because it would be maybe a little bit less degenerate then. Yeah, so Answer the Call is doing a pretty cool thing where it picks from the top 6 cards of your deck, which, if you have a high unit count, 30, I would say, or more, you have a really good chance of hitting one. Like, the chance of hitting a whiff here is not very unlikely. Like, I think that if you're playing a bunch of units and weapons, you're probably pretty happy to cast Answer the Call on 6, and then what it plays for you is probably not likely to cost under 6, but because you, A, have a pretty good chance of getting a weapon on it, and B, get to pick the unit from the top 6 cards of your deck, so it has a higher chance of being the card that you most want at the moment. Those two things make it probably reasonable to play in mid-range decks that are trying to do some mildly aggressive things with weapons. So specifically Argenport midrange, which always wants more chances to play Tavrod and already has a bunch of weapons in it because Tavrod likes to pick up weapons. Rakano, which is not really still in a mid-range spot, but definitely has some good possible choices for it, including like the Navani Stella matchup, if you're doing like the Deep Forge Plate stuff with Silverwing Familiars. There's lots of cool things where Answer the Call actually feels like a pretty good top end, and you can use that to play a bunch of weapons. If you play Shogun Scepters or something like that, then you suddenly fill your whole board, and you've got like a pretty cool like sort of aggressive strategy. If you play Warhelms on the unit, then you get a really big surprise, and that's really cool. So yeah, there's some good stuff here. So like on a non-degenerate level, I think this card is playable. I think it will probably see play in a couple of mid-range decks and maybe even one tier 1 deck. We will see, but it's going to be hard to say. Now, on a degenerate level, this card is hilariously fun. There's a ton of cool stuff to do with it, and there's so many interesting designs. You can do Divining Rod with like a pile of Overwhelm units. That one's probably not going to be all that great because in general, you just want to Divining Rod your unit, and you don't necessarily need to grab an Overwhelm unit, then Divining Rod it, and then hope that that does the thing. That's a lot of different plates to spin, but it does give you potentially extra chances to hit your Divining Rod. And so Answer the Call is pretty fun in that respect. You can do this in a Navani deck with Warhelms and Hammer of Might and Shogun Scepter. You can get like a ton of War Cries out, and then you can charge in with them, and you can beef up everything in your deck forever. And that's a really cool thing to do in like a mid-rangey like sort of shenanigans deck with a bunch of weapons. You can do this in a Rakano deck with like Roland's Fist and Rock Carapace and cards like Sensari Brigand and the 2/1 charge, which I've forgotten the name of at the moment, but like little charge units that you just suddenly hit your opponent with for like 17. That's a pretty cool thing to do with an Answer to the Call against an empty board. So there's some cool things where you could basically just generate like really nasty double damage units and just blow your opponent out off of one Answer the Call. You can do this in Huru. Huru actually has like a lot of good mono justice cards, such as Dueling. There's some that give you justice sigils. You can use like Privilege of Rank and the pistol that gives you 2 justice sigils there. So Answer the Call could potentially ramp you into a bunch of power, which is kind of cool for empower strategies and for any sort of other fun stuff on that front. You've also got access to Peacekeeper's Prod, which is a really good immediate board game impact, and Inquisitor's Blade, which is a revenge card that you're pretty likely to have in the top 6 cards of your deck, since it has revenge. So you can definitely get those kinds of cards, and like with revenge units, you can do some interesting options as well. Argenport's very happy with it, obviously, for all of the obvious Argenport reasons, and like if you're answering the call for Huru cards, I think you can pick up either Aegis units, or you can pick up Svetchas. You can pick up things that actually like really help you in the right situation, and that's a pretty good thing to do. And then finally, there's like really degenerate stuff like Westwind Herald and Dural Iceheart, which are cards that have really solid infiltrate effects that you can then trigger off of cards like Hellfire Rifle or Icebow or Hot Barrel Revolver if you're super lucky. And if you play these with like Warhelm and Smith's Hammer and Morningstar, then you can give Dural Iceheart Overwhelm. Answer the Call is a 6-cost card, so Dural Iceheart can pick a 6-cost card off of your deck, and then it can use that Overwhelm damage to just blow out your opponent and deal a ton of damage to his face. Or you can use it to use Westwind Herald to Warhelm or Icebow a Westwind Herald, and then suddenly channel the Tempest your opponent a bunch of times, or 8 of the Huru your opponent, which if you're doing like a Privilege of Rank style deck, you might be really trying to do already. So yeah, there's some really cool shenanigans with this one. We're going to do so many brews with Answer the Call. I think it's a really cool marquee card for the set, and I'm very excited about it. So yeah, I'm very happy to see some new set 4 cards coming out. There's still a month as far as things go for set 4 to come out, and I am psyched about it in pretty much every way. So while I hope that some changes get made to that 3-cost card, I am okay with it existing at the very least, and I would say that I'm much more psyched than I am not at the moment. So yeah, we're gonna see some cool things coming up. We got more spoilers for you soon, I'm sure, and I am excited to talk about them as soon as we get them. So I will see you guys next time. Feel free to like and subscribe if you liked the video, and have a really good night. Cheers.